Visionaries, experts, digital champions. They reimagine the way healthcare is delivered. They challenge established practices. They connect people, purpose, and data. They don't just create new products or processes. They build a new culture and capabilities. They take small steps while preparing for a giant leap. They aren't afraid to fail. In fact, they relish experimentation. They truly believe their efforts bring innovative, affordable healthcare to the most inaccessible parts of the world. Their vision might sound daunting, but you can't argue it's not necessary. At Indegene, we feel proud to bring them together. Because together, we enable future-ready healthcare.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, and a very warm welcome everyone to this 2021 edition of Indegene Digital Summit. It's great to see so many familiar faces and names attending the Indegene Digital Summit this year. Brings back some very memorable moments from our previous editions of the Indegene Digital Summit. It's also very encouraging to see so many of you who joined us earlier have joined us again to advance the agenda of future-ready healthcare. Conversations such as these, where we have candid exchange of experiences and ideas, we believe are very helpful in our quest to drive healthcare ahead. Last year, we witnessed a heightened sense of urgency amongst healthcare stakeholders to adopt digital. It is also very evident that organizations that were prepared and anyway on the path of digital could not only be much more resilient, but they also had the opportunity to stand out with their customers. This has emphasized the need to prepare and build capabilities now to be resilient today and tomorrow, as well as be agile to lead the future. That's why the theme of this year's summit is Prepare Now, Lead the Future. Aligning with this theme, our esteemed speakers will be driving conversations on how digital customer experience, capability building, innovation, organizational reorg, and readiness can help with digital readiness. I hope all of you enjoy the interactive sessions, engage with the panelists through Q&A and polls, and take back valuable learnings from this event. Without any further ado, let me kickstart the event by introducing our keynote speaker for the event, Amit Fadnis. Amit is the Chief Digital Officer at GE Healthcare, a $17 billion medical technology and digital solutions innovator in the healthcare industry. Prior to this role as the Chief Digital Officer, Amit has been the CTO of GE Healthcare Imaging. He also has had earlier stints before GE at Cisco and Motorola. Amit also has 25 patents in the communications and networking space in his name. It's a privilege and pleasure to have Amit with us. Welcome, Amit.
Start the presentation, but first of all, Manish and Indegene team, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here. Future-ready healthcare is an absolutely relevant topic at this point in time, as we still seem to be grappling with the pandemic to a large extent. So let me switch to the slides. Let's just confirm that you can see my slides. Okay, hello everybody. As I was saying, this particular topic today, the future-ready healthcare, is a really relevant topic given what the world is still going through, I would say, and grappling with the pandemic. I want to start off with a personal story. My daughter is a doctor in India, and she's been sort of posted in emergency since January this year. in one of the largest hospitals in north of India. And as you can imagine, the frontline healthcare workers have been going through some tremendous amount of stress, especially as India went through the second wave. And I was talking to her. We were obviously very concerned about her through this time. But as we were speaking to her, one of the things that she said to me was very interesting, which was, first of all, there was a flood of patients, and they were struggling with whom do you pay attention to in first place. The second thing that she said is, there are so many cases that come in who are, 5 days, 7 days into some sort of an episode. They bring with them an X-ray and an X-ray report. And at the first look of the X-ray, you know that the lungs are, sort of pretty damaged. And you pretty much know, looking at the X-ray, that the patient has probably gone through COVID or is still going through COVID. And you look at the X-ray report, it basically still says, no COVID. And the patient sort of takes time thinking that things are going to be okay, and then deteriorates very, very quickly. Now, this is an episode that has obviously repeated many, many times. I would also give you a second anecdote that she has been sort of talking to me about, which is, she said, even when we know what the issue is, specifically with respect to COVID, there have been so many times, a similar patient, similar condition, you put the patient on the same sort of care pathway, similar treatment. One patient recovers very, very quickly. Another patient, deteriorates very fast, and you still wonder, what's going on. And I think this is really relevant for us today, because, this talks about, this goes into our ability to sort of be very precise with biomarkers and with understanding of what really is going on with an individual patient, not at a generic level. And this is the theme of precision health overall. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about this. Now, when we sort of look at the larger healthcare ecosystem, there are several challenges in spite of some tremendous amount of funding and advances in technology that have happened over a period of time. I think there is about $7 to $8 trillion of money that goes into healthcare right now. But if you really look at this at a high level, what we realize is that about 3.8 billion patients across the globe, which is more than half of the population, it still does not have access to basic healthcare. And something for us to sort of reflect upon, because if we can make use of technology, if we can make use of data, and if we can just make healthcare affordable and accessible to people, it can have a very significant positive impact on the society. The second thing that we see is that in spite of advances in technology, in spite of progress being made in different countries from a healthcare perspective, when you look at how the healthcare system works today, in the US alone, there is $1 trillion of wastage that happens in the healthcare ecosystem. And if you reflect on this and think about the fact that there are still 3.8 billion people who really do not have even access to basic healthcare, I think it's our responsibility to try and do everything to avoid that wastage. And as we'll see later, digital data, AI, analytics, all of these things, right, combined with other technologies, can play a huge role in we being able to sort of reduce wastage in the health ecosystem. If you look at the OECD report recently, they basically said in Europe, 20% of the entire healthcare spend they categorize as pure waste. And I think that just goes to say, that this is a pressing problem that we need to obviously work on. And then, if you look at the clinician, the physician, with everything that we are trying to provide them, from a technology perspective, because of the patient load, scarcity of expertise, and the number of patients they need to look at, and more importantly, and this is a very important point, because of the overload of information that we are pushing towards them, 78% of the clinicians in the US are reporting burnouts, right? So they're fatigued, they complain about burnout. And obviously, when that happens, there is a probability that there are errors that are going to creep into the system overall. And in fact, in the US alone, there are 3 million plus deaths reported every year because of medical errors, right? And I think that's something to reflect upon, because there are a number of things that we can do from a precision health perspective specifically, but also with data and analytics to really improve the situation. And then lastly, when you look at the patient, the patient outcome has been improving, but it's still not where it needs to be, right? So as I said, there are a number of errors that creep into the system. A lot of treatments seem to be treating at the very generic level at this point in time, and we need to get to a lot more precision in terms of understanding what's really going on with the individual and be able to target the therapy very, very specifically to a individual condition rather than a disease state at a generic level. So that's the overall, sort of framing that I would say, if you look at the challenges in the healthcare system at this point in time. Now, obviously, the pandemic has, put a lot of stress over the last 15 to 18 months. One of the things that we have seen is that there were a number of healthcare systems about February, March last year. They were forced into making massive changes to the way they deliver, care to the patients because of the pandemic, right? Because of social distancing norms, because of, literally a flood of patients that they were getting, and the need to sort of be able to modify the care pathways very, very quickly. So a number of health systems actually put in, changes that would have normally taken 4 to 5 years for them in a matter of weeks, right? And if you look at the bottom of this slide, it sort of talks to some of the changes that they had to sort of put in place. Now, the good news is that a lot of these changes are here to stay, because through the pandemic, both patients, physicians, as well as the healthcare system at large has realized that some of the changes that have been put in place are actually for the good of everybody, right? When you look at it from a patient perspective, when you look at it from a payer perspective, and the insurance companies in the US or the governments across the globe, as well as the health systems, is driving a certain amount of efficiency and access to healthcare that would have been very difficult without these changes, as was the situation before the pandemic. So I think that in a way is a sort of silver lining in what the world is going through from a healthcare perspective at this point in time. But essentially, if you try to summarize what those changes are, they are related to virtualization and distribution of healthcare, because obviously of the social distancing norms and the need of, to protect our frontline workers in general, so that they could treat, patients to a large extent, as much as possible, virtually and remotely. In a way, the hospital is going outside of the four walls, but more importantly, the hospital is also getting distributed across the geographies, right? So we see a lot of health systems across the globe, tying up with rural clinics, outpatient centers, community hospitals. And, there are a number of patients who are going to those clinics rather than coming to the super hospital. But these clinics do not have the expertise, and therefore there is a virtualization of health and distribution of healthcare delivery that needs to happen. And I think the technology and the digital technologies need to really support that. So I want to talk a little bit about where G Healthcare plays in this space. We are a $18 billion company, 47,000 employees. We are in 160 countries. We have been in the healthcare space for close to maybe 100 years. We have tremendous amount of knowledge base in terms of just clinical processes. But over a period of time, through the work that we have done with the providers or with the hospital systems, we have established great relationships and deployed a tremendous amount of technology with the healthcare systems overall. We invest about $1 billion in R&D annually because that's really the sort of foundation on which we provide, the technology. We are a healthcare technology company in a way. We support 300,000 patients daily with GE imaging agents. We have about 4 million devices worldwide deployed at this point in time. And we literally collect billions of images in a very short time. And I'll talk to you about the amount of data that we are producing at this point in time. But we are one of the largest producers of healthcare data. And in fact, if you look at the entire ecosystem outside of healthcare, we are probably the largest producers of data through the devices that we have deployed for patient care across the globe. The key technologies we deal with, imaging obviously is a very big area for us, whether it is CT, MRI, ultrasound, X-ray, mammo. We have a very large number of devices in the field. Patient monitoring, anesthesia systems, respiratory, what we call critical care solutions, imaging agents, right? And we have invested very significantly in digital over the last few years. But the way I would summarize our play in this space is that we are absolutely strong in the diagnostic areas of the health system overall. And when you talk about the precision health aspect of it, through digital and through the partnerships that we are stitching together, I think there is a tremendous opportunity for us to come together as an ecosystem to combine, diagnostics with precision therapies. So, if we can join these two together, that's really the vision as far as the digital precision health is concerned. And it will go a very long way in addressing some of the challenges that we talked on the earlier slide, essentially. And I think that's what we think, we need to be able to do as GE Healthcare with the larger ecosystem outside. If we can sort of merge the clinical medicine and data science, okay, that's what would really be able to sort of get us to the point where we can talk about precision health in a big way. And it, in a way, is a combination of diagnostics and therapeutics, right? And our ability to do that is going to be very critical. Now, if you think about this and think about where and why, physicians and clinicians are reporting burnout and overload of information, you see on this page that today, with all of the technology that we have provided and all the information and data that we produce, the physician is spending about 50 to 60% of their time, on the EHR, looking at the data rather than interacting with the patient. And that in itself is a problem. So there is a scarcity of that, physician time and attention as far as the patient is concerned on one side. And then there is abundance of, data as a resource on the other side. The challenge that we have is that entire information base, the data, 95% of that data is not in use at this point in time. If we can only sort of make use of that data effectively, and rather than throwing information at the clinicians, get to precise insights and use those precise insights in form of biomarkers or in form of operational insights and so on and so forth, to really be able to target care to the specific conditions of the patients, we would improve the healthcare scenario dramatically across the globe, right? And I think that's essentially what our vision is. As GE Healthcare, we are investing obviously in a lot of these technologies, as you saw on the earlier page. We are also investing in digital, but more importantly, we are sort of stitching together partnerships across the globe to try and see whether we can, bring diagnostics and therapeutics together and be the bridge between those two elements to really get to precision health. Now, we realized very early in this journey that this is something that we are not going to achieve ourselves, right? So the ecosystem here is going to be extremely important. And if you really look at the way the VC funding has happened over the last few years, if not a decade, from a digital and AI perspective, it's very, very clear that not one company is going to be able to solve this problem. So it is extremely important for us to come together as an ecosystem and make this happen. I do want to talk a little bit about the digital foundation and some of the challenges that we have from a digital perspective. Over a period of time, there has been a significant investment in technology. There is a lot of imaging technology today. There is obviously the EHR, which is a patient repository of all the information related to that, to a patient. There are anesthesia machines. There are bedside monitors, which have been sort of digitally connected together, right? But still, what we see is that when you look at a patient, there is a tremendous amount of information about that patient across the health system, but that information is siloed in different departments of the health system at this point in time. So when you think about the clinician and the patient interaction, when a clinician or a physician is looking at the patient, okay, they literally have to swivel chair between multiple applications because each application is catering to a particular silo of the data that the health system has. So they go to one application, they may be looking at images in radiology, or they may be looking at the lab information coming from the lab information system, or they may be looking at digital pathology, right, or pathology information. Now more and more genomic information is available, so they look at genomic information. All of these they look at as separate applications because of the vertical siloing of information that has happened through the health system, and that the onus of stitching the entire patient context is right now with the physician. So the physician has to really in their head stitch together what does this entire information mean, and that's the root cause of a lot of issues, including burnout, as I said earlier, and overload of information. Now, we have constantly heard from physicians across the globe that if only companies can help us put together this information in an aggregated fashion so that we can actually create a comprehensive longitudinal record of the patient, it will become a lot easier for the physicians. Or in fact, the applications can become that much more intelligent, and it makes life a lot more easier for the physician to really sort of get a 360-degree context. Now, when we look at our partners in the pharma sector, they have very similar issues too, whether it is on the trial side or whether it is on the therapy side. One of the major issues that they have is that while there may be a lot of information available, that information is not aggregated. And when the information is not aggregated, when you look at things like AI, you tend to silo your AI solution to a particular type of information. And you don't necessarily get to the biomarker with the level of accuracy that you need for you to be able to really identify the patient and the precise condition of the patient so that you can be very precise with the therapies that you can apply. The second issue that we have because of siloing of all this information is that, by the time, a particular disease state is clearly identified, it often is a little bit too late because the biomarkers or the signals that are available earlier are very weak. When the disease is progressing in the early part of the disease, the signals are very weak. And if you don't combine the signals, you often don't have an ability to really get to the actual disease state very early in the disease progression. And I think this is a holy grail as far as the pharma companies are concerned, because if we can sort of put together multimodal information and make sure that we can use multimodal data sets and the weak signals in those data sets, but combine them in such a way that you can actually get to a biomarker very early in the disease progression, you can target therapies at those patients much more precisely, and the outcome from a patient perspective is phenomenal. right? It's dramatically better if the therapy is available early in the early stages of the disease progression rather than in the later stages of disease progression. And in oncology, for example, this can make a significant difference even in matter of weeks. If we can only sort of be able to get to the disease state a little bit earlier, it can make a significant difference from a patient outcome perspective. So this is what we have been sort of dealing with from at the GE healthcare level. And one of the things we realized very quickly is that we first of all, as a foundation, we need to be able to aggregate this information at the health system level, and that aggregation needs to be multimodal. And to do that, we have to really first of all connect everything, right? So we have to connect all of our devices, we have to connect the EHR, we have to connect the PACS and the VNA systems, which have imaging repository. We have to be able to connect to the genomic information or the digital pathology information. So connectivity and data aggregation were some of the themes that we were working on, and this is where we conceptualized what we call today the Edison platform. Think about the Edison platform as literally the healthcare operating system, okay, which connects all of the devices, which ingest the information on the platform. We have data aggregation technologies. And then what we have done is that we have created a set of tools, we call them healthcare services, to really process this information and be able to put that information, processed information, in the form of clinical workflows or applications that are, by the way, consumed by either the patient or by the physicians, in our case, to a large extent by the physicians. And that's what the Edison platform is. Now, one of the things that we did very early in the journey of this platform development is that we also realized the importance of the ecosystem. And when we develop these services, we have literally hundreds of services to process the aggregated information on the platform, including, how do I build AI? How do I, develop an inference engine? How do I orchestrate AI? How do I orchestrate workflows? Can I do remote patient monitoring? Okay, so on and so forth. So there's a slew of services that we have built. But one of the things that we did is we opened up these services so that we can start orchestrating a larger healthcare ecosystem outside of GE Healthcare to try and complete the solutions from a precision health perspective. When we work with the external community, we have created accelerators. We have accelerator in China. We have an accelerator in India. We have an accelerator in Europe. We are working with about 25, 30 companies, startup companies in the US. We are working now with pharma companies across the globe, predominantly in the US, but across the globe too. One of the things that we realized also is the importance of being able to fit the algorithm or analytics in a clinician's workflow. Because what you'll see, and there are a number of companies that are struggling with this in the startup community. One is availability and variety of data sets. But the second important thing is, even if you have a great algorithm, if that algorithm does not fit seamlessly in a clinician's workflow, it becomes very difficult for the physician to actually benefit from that algorithm. We hear the same thing from the pharma companies, right? They have invested significantly in AI too, to basically get to that precise biomarker, right? Which can be used either for cohorting the patients from a trial perspective or from a precise identification of the disease state on the therapy side. But the ability to sort of orchestrate that algorithm in an existing clinical workflow is paramount, right? And I think what we have done on the platform is really develop technology and develop workflow solutions so that we will be able to do precisely that, which is be able to orchestrate a third-party ecosystem, as well as orchestrate algorithms and analytics that we create within GE Healthcare very seamlessly in clinicians' workflow. And I think this aspect is a very important aspect from a platform perspective. So look, if I sort of reflect back on some of the important modules there and think about this from AI perspective for now, because there are a number of services that we created in the AI space on the platform. We've started working with the pharma companies. Some of the things that we are able to help them with, and there is an ask on the table from many of the pharma companies, is availability of real world data, right? And because of the fact that we have relationships with a number of hospital systems across the globe, as well as have devices deployed today across the globe, as we get this platform introduced, we have an ability to be the source of information or source of data for a number of pharma companies, for example, which can then be targeted towards algorithm development, either for cohorting patients from a trial perspective, as well as from the therapy standpoint. We have provided a bunch of tools, right, to really be able to develop AI, but also deploy AI, right? And then, as I said, post-processing, libraries, the workflow tools, right? We have something called an Edison orchestrator and so on and so forth, which will allow you to take an algorithm and really then fit it in a workflow and create an application out of which can be seamlessly consumed by a physician, or it could be a patient-facing sort of an application. But we have all of these tools which we are able to deploy in the health systems that we are already present, right? Because of the devices that we have deployed over a period of time. So we are essentially deploying the platform in front of those devices and making these tools available so that we can both source information, develop AI, but more importantly, deploy AI in a clinical workflow. I want to give you a very simple example here. I referred to my daughter earlier, and I talked to you a little bit about the fact that she looks at an X-ray. This X-ray is taken in some rural setting, and unfortunately, in many cases, in the rural setting, because of the lack of expertise, somebody has looked at that X-ray, maybe interpreted that X-ray erroneously. Time goes by, the patient deteriorates, ends up in a sort of super hospital. And then you realize that, okay, there was we didn't really sort of diagnose the patient correctly. And in the meantime, time has passed and the patient has deteriorated. Now, what we have done about a couple of years back is, on the X-ray side, we actually worked with a number of clinicians, worked with a number of hospital systems. We gathered information and data, X-ray data and chest X-ray data in this particular case. One of the challenges that the clinicians were telling us at that time was they were having difficulty in quickly identifying a collapsed lung condition or what is called pneumothorax. And there were errors in detection of that in the health system. So using data produced on our devices as well as other vendors' devices, we were able to build an AI algorithm that we took through an FDA approval, which is basically an automatic detection of pneumothorax, right? And the whole idea here is that if you're in emergency, you take a chest X-ray for a patient who has respiratory distress, then and there, you should be able to flag whether this is a collapsed lung condition so that the rest of the care pathway can be kicked off immediately without waiting for the radiologist to be able to sort of get to the image at some point in time. And sometimes there can be several hours that can go by in between before the radiologist actually reads the image after the X-ray being taken. The second example here, is placement of ET tubes. And again, there are errors in the introduction of the ET tube in a patient. And as you can imagine, if the tube is not inserted properly, it can be fatal for the patient, right? So when the ET tube is inserted, we can take an X-ray and we can very quickly through AI detect whether the ET tube itself is placed correctly. And if it is not, then some corrective action can be taken. And we have been able to save many lives. Now, these are very simple examples, but it just shows that even with single modality AI, okay, we can get to fairly good sort of biomarkers to understand the patient condition, fairly quickly. But as you can imagine, single modality AI algorithms have certain limitations. And when you talk to oncologists, they will tell you that the diagnosis gets delayed if you rely just on single modality AI. So they've been asking us to sort of try and look at comprehensive patient information right up front and use that longitudinal information in development of AI. And this is where we actually announced a partnership with Sophia recently. They have done a tremendous amount of work in the genomics space. And essentially what we are doing with Sophia right now is take the genomic information, combine it with imaging information such as MRI, and try and combine and all other information in EHR and things like that. But combine the signals, right? So that when the signals are much weaker in the early part of the disease, okay, we are able to still detect the signals through AI by using multimodal data sets. And therefore, hopefully, right, we'll be able to sort of get to a care pathway and trigger a care pathway much earlier in the disease progression. This is extremely valuable, as you can imagine, from a pharma perspective, even from a therapy standpoint, right? So I would again say, for us to be successful in this journey, is something that we will never be able to do as a single company. And in fact, the essence of the platform that we have built is that we want to open up that platform. We have already opened it up, but really create an ecosystem where pharma companies, startup companies working in the digital and AI space, companies such as GE Healthcare, other companies which are, working in the healthcare space, including the EHR companies, can come together and we can actually try and solve some of these real pressing problems that we have in healthcare right now, which hopefully will be able to, cater to some of the challenges that we talked about earlier, which is, can we improve access? Can we reduce wastage in the health system? Can we actually, cater to physician burnout? And most importantly, can we get better patient outcomes by getting in early in the disease progression, identifying the disease at a much earlier stage, and then helping target a very precise therapy to the precise condition that the patient has, to drive a much better outcome from a patient perspective. Because at the end of the day, there is nothing worse than a patient with a disease progressing in front of the in front of the eyes of the physicians, because we sort of delayed or we were not able to detect the condition much earlier in the stages. So I think that's really what we are trying to do. So to wrap up, what I would say is that if you think about how do we go about solving this, aggregation of information, longitudinal information, and multimodal data sets is absolutely foundational. And then we need platforms to be able to do the last mile integration once we have used that information to create AI. And lastly, I would say precision medicine does require deep partnerships across the ecosystem. And I'm hoping that we can join hands together to actually create that partnership and the ecosystem that will really be able to get to that. So with that, I want to sort of stop here and maybe turn it over for a few questions.
Thank you so much, Amit. This was a great session, especially the thing about you speak about leveraging the ecosystem. I think as healthcare, and I can speak more about the pharmaceutical side, we've been good at leveraging ecosystem, but the digital world which we are moving in probably necessitates much more collaboration across stakeholders than what we have ever done. So that was a great session. Thank you. Let me, there are a lot of questions. Let's see how many of these we can take. Let me start with the first question for you. What is the fidelity of data for AI engines to make the right decisions in precision medicine? I'm sure that's a question you get asked and think about a lot. Over to you, Amit.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be frank with you, data is like crude oil, right? Uh, just the availability of data is not sufficient. And what we have seen generally as we do AI development and also work with the ecosystems outside is there is a significant issue with two or three aspects of data, right? The first and foremost is the quality of the data itself. The second is the quality of the ground truth on the data, because AI in a way is dumb, right? It's a misnomer. But AI will tell you what you're told AI. Okay. So the better the ground truth on the data, the better the output of the AI algorithm would be. And we find there are significant issues with the ground truth. So first is quality of the data. So you have to process the data just like the crude oil. It goes through a number of stages of refinement, before it can be used as an end product. It's a similar situation with data. You have to actually process the information, curate it, annotate it. It has to have a good ground truth. And then, you have to have the ability to sort of combine that with other types of data to really get to a really good data set that can be applied. There is a second aspect that I do want to talk to you about from a data fidelity perspective. I mean, it's not just about the quality of the data, and what we've seen a number of companies struggling with as far as AI is concerned is that even if they have 2,000, 3,000, sometimes even 5,000 or 10,000 data sets, if the data sets are not varied, okay, the end outcome is not as effective, right? So, you need the variety of data. So you need data from different regions, different genotypes, and it is not often the quantity of the data, but the variety and the quality of the information that determines how good your algorithm can be, right? The third aspect of this is, when you say that, okay, I'm curating the data, I'm annotating, okay, the data with a ground truth. Unfortunately, there are not many standards. It's not a very standardized process as to how those annotations are done. So if you use data sets that have been annotated by different sets of people in different regions, combining all of that information together is a challenge, right? And then obviously there is data security and privacy issue, and that gets into federated learning and how we can, develop AI in a distributed fashion, and then be able to bring together all of those distributed entities into a more holistic, sort of better AI algorithm. But there are several issues with respect to data. So a number of health systems that we work with, they have tremendous amount of information, 4 or 5 petabytes of information. Sometimes we don't know what they have. Secondly, we don't know what the quality of that information is, and it often requires a significant amount of processing before it can actually be effectively utilized for AI.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. And I guess you also had in a slide where you speak about clinical intelligence plus AI. So I guess in healthcare for a long period of time, we'll always have human in the loop. It's going to be a while before that's taken out. And you alluded to that in one of your slides, I remember. Perfect.
No, absolutely.
So, so the next question I've got from the audience for you, Amit, is that to really get the maximum benefit, you have to integrate prescriptions, diagnosis, and data sciences. According to you, from a platform perspective, what is the single biggest roadblock?
So look, as I said, right, I mean, what is the most pressing problem that we need to solve? I mean, if you think about everything that we just talked about, our ability to really aggregate multimodal information is critical. And it sounds very easy, but it's a very difficult thing to do. And that's why it has not been done, by the way. So if you talk to health systems across the globe, everybody is trying to do this right now. Pharma companies are trying to do it, right? But there is progress, but there is not sufficient progress in this space. And it's precisely for the reason that the question was alluding to, which is the variety of information is immense, right? You have your demographic information, your social information, you now more and more information coming from the wearable devices, your reports, right? You have images, you have lab information, right? And then your genomics, your digital pathology, and so on and so forth, right? how do you actually combine this information into a single longitudinal record? And what you'll realize very quickly is that these data pipelines, the individual data pipelines, you can't actually just take all of this raw information and say, I will aggregate this information into one single entity for a given patient, right? So essentially what you need to do is as you form these data pipelines, you have, in fact, you have to use AI to even extract the right signal from the data. We call it metadata, for example, right? And then try and standardize the metadata at the patient level, right? So how do you represent the metadata in a patient longitudinal record, or we call it a patient jacket, by the way. Okay. So, if you look at a patient jacket, okay, how do you take all these varied information across the health system and be able to represent it consistently, right, as metadata? Now, remember that the raw information is not in the patient jacket. You don't want to sort of, pulling all of the, gigabytes and gigabytes of information in imaging or genomics into the patient jacket. You have to aggregate the metadata and have the ability to reach to the raw data if required, right? And that's a significant amount of work that we are doing at this point in time. And it is challenging, by the way. So where the ecosystem plays, by the way, is to make sure that, if you are a part of the ecosystem, if you're a producer of the data, we sort of come together to construct that data pipeline so that we can work together to extract the right signal and represent that signal in a patient jacket in a uniform way. Now, that is the starting point for AI, by the way. That's not the end point of AI, correct? So once we have that information, then we can start working on AI, and this is the challenging aspect of it, and that's what we're trying to solve.
Very, 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 very interesting. I have a lot of questions, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. Wish we had some more time. This is an interesting session. We'll be missing a lot of the questions the audience have asked. But Amit, this was a really great session. Thank you so much for taking the time out. And it was a privilege and pleasure having you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manish. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
Thanks.